She was different. Her skin was dark, her hair a curly halo that stood out. No one wants her. In the heart of a bustling city stood a quiet, unassuming building, an orphanage. Every child in the orphanage found a home, except one. Alisha, a little girl with skin like midnight, watched as family after family turned their backs on her. At just 5 years old, she had already learned the painful truth of being invisible, not because she wasn't beautiful, not because she wasn't kind, but because of something she couldn't change, her skin. But beneath the surface of rejection lies a far darker truth, one that could shatter powerful systems, expose deep-rooted conspiracies. The air in the orphanage was always filled with the sounds of children laughing, crying, or playing. But not Alisha. From the moment she stepped into the large, sterile halls at age 5, her presence was met with avoidance, whispers, and sidelong glances. Unlike the other children, with their fair skin and blonde hair, she was different. Her skin was dark, her hair a curly halo that stood out. No one wants her, the other children would mutter when a prospective family came to visit. They didn't even have to say it. The parents who visited the orphanage, seeking to adopt, barely let their gaze rest on Alisha for more than a few seconds. The uncomfortable looks, the stiff smiles, all conveyed the same thing. She's not the one. Years passed in that lonely bubble of exclusion. Every time a family came, the hope would spark just for a moment. Maybe this time, someone would choose her, but the families would come and go, and Alisha would remain, sitting on the window ledge of the shared dorm, watching as the other children left one by one. Even at a young age, she understood why. It wasn't something wrong with her personality. It wasn't because she didn't smile enough or speak politely. It was her skin, a barrier she couldn't cross. By the time she was 10, Alisha had learned to numb the hurt. The ritual of rejection became familiar. When potential adoptive parents arrived, she would stay quietly to the side, knowing they would overlook her. The conversations about her worth and potential happened behind closed doors, and she overheard snippets. "We're looking for a child who will fit into our family dot." That statement always translated into one cruel truth: she's black, and we're not. Though the orphanage staff tried to make her feel loved and accepted, there was only so much they could do. Mrs. Evelyn, the orphanage director, would sometimes sit with her after the other children went to bed, offering quiet words of reassurance.
"Alisha, you are special,"
Mrs. Evelyn would say softly.
"One day someone will see how wonderful you are."
But Alisha, even at such a young age, had stopped believing it. After a decade of waiting, she had become invisible. At age 15, Alisha had aged out of the orphanage's adoption system. No family would be interested in adopting a teenager, let alone one who had been passed over her entire life. Now, officially too old for adoption, she faced a new reality. The orphanage was still her home, but she was no longer just a child waiting for a family. Mrs. Evelyn, ever compassionate, offered her a position as an administrative assistant. It wasn't much, but it was better than the alternative, being turned out into the world with nowhere to go. Alisha took the job, helping to file papers, sort records and manage phone calls. It kept her busy, kept her mind off the bitter truth of her existence. Still, she watched the new children who came into the orphanage, wide-eyed and scared, just as she had once been. She saw the same hopes spark in them, the same smiles that would fade with time as rejection became familiar. It was a cycle, and Alisha was trapped in it, but she found small joys where she could. Some of the children, especially the younger ones, loved her. They would run to her when they were scared or sad, clinging to her for comfort. Their tiny arms around her neck reminded her of the love she had never fully received herself, but she gave it willingly. Yet, even as the younger children looked up to her, the world outside the orphanage doors remained as harsh as ever. Every trip to the grocery store, every errand she ran for Mrs. Evelyn reminded her of her place in society. The looks, the whispers, the subtle ways people distanced themselves, none of it had changed, and she had stopped expecting it to. It was a rainy afternoon when Bruce walked into Alisha's life. The orphanage had been quiet that day, the children tucked away in their rooms, and Alisha was at the front desk, filing some paperwork. She barely noticed when the door opened, and a young man in his early 20s stepped inside.
"Hello, I'm here to speak with Mrs. Evelyn."
The man said, his voice warm and polite. His eyes, however, lingered on Alisha for a moment longer than most people's did. It wasn't a glance of judgment or curiosity. It was something else entirely. Genuine interest. Alisha looked up, her breath catching slightly. It wasn't often that someone like Bruce, a tall, handsome white man, looked at her like that. In fact, it had never happened before. She nodded and stood to call for Mrs. Evelyn. But something about the encounter stuck with her. His presence, his eyes, the way he seemed to truly see her. Over the next few months, Bruce became a familiar face at the orphanage. He volunteered, spending time with the children, helping with renovations, and even fundraising events. He was kind, charismatic, and seemed to brighten every room he entered. But what stood out most to Alisha was the way he treated her. Bruce didn't look at her like everyone else did. He didn't flinch or avoid eye contact. In fact, he often sought her out for conversation, asking her about her life, her dreams, and her thoughts on the world. At first, Alisha had been cautious. Years of prejudice had taught her not to trust too easily. But as time went on, she found herself lowering her guard. Bruce was different. He didn't just see her skin, he saw her. One afternoon, they found themselves alone in the orphanage's garden. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the flowers and trees. Bruce turned to Alisha, his blue eyes searching hers.
Alisha,
He said softly.
I want to take you out sometime. Just the two of us.
She blinked in surprise, her heart skipping a beat.
Out? You mean, like on a date?
Bruce smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression.
Yeah, on a date. I like you.
For a moment, Alisha was speechless. She'd never expected something like this. A man like Bruce, kind, gentle, and white, wanted to be with her. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part, the part that had been hurt so many times before, hesitated.
Are you sure?
She asked quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty.
I mean, people won't understand. They'll judge us.
Bruce took her hand in his touch gentle and reassuring.
I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about you. That's all that matters.
Alisha looked down at their joined hands, her heart racing. She hadn't felt this way before. She hadn't thought it possible for someone like Bruce to see her, to want her. The thought filled her with a dangerous hope, a hope she'd long buried beneath years of disappointment and rejection. But here it was, tugging at her, urging her to take a leap she wasn't sure she was ready for.
Okay,
She whispered, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips.
I'll go on a date with you.
Bruce's face lit up, his smile wide and genuine.
Great. How about Saturday? We can go to that little cafe by the park. I hear they have great coffee.
Alisha nodded, the nervousness slowly turning into excitement.
Saturday sounds perfect.
For the rest of the week, she found herself daydreaming about Bruce, about their date, about what it would mean to be with someone like him. But as the days passed, so did the shadow of doubt. She couldn't ignore the whispers of her past, the voices that had told her over and over again that she didn't belong, that someone like her could never be accepted. The world outside the orphanage wasn't kind to people like her. She had seen it firsthand, felt it in the way people avoided her in public, in the way their eyes slid past her, as if she were invisible. And now, she was about to step into that world with Bruce by her side. What would people think? What would they say? But when Saturday came and she saw Bruce waiting for her outside the orphanage, all her doubts faded. He smiled at her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere. The cafe was warm and cozy, filled with the comforting scent of coffee and pastries. They found a quiet corner near the window where they could talk without being overheard. At first, the conversation was light, filled with jokes and laughter. But as the afternoon wore on, the topic shifted to something more serious.
Can I ask you something?
Bruce said, his voice hesitant.
I've noticed people treat you differently. I mean, I've seen the way they look at you when we're out together.
Alisha's heart clenched. She'd been hoping he wouldn't notice, hoping he would be oblivious to the subtle glances, the whispered remarks. But of course, he wasn't.
It's because I'm black.
She said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup.
People don't like it when someone who looks like me is with someone who looks like you.
Bruce frowned, his hand reaching across the table to cover hers.
That's not fair. It's not right.
Alisha shrugged.
It's the way things are. I've been dealing with it my whole life. People don't think I belong.
Bruce's grip tightened.
Well, they're wrong. You belong with me, if that's what you want.
Alisha smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude.
I do want that, Bruce. I want it more than anything.
Their relationship blossomed in the weeks that followed. Bruce and Alisha spent every moment they could together, going on long walks, having picnics in the park, and talking about everything under the sun. For the first time in her life, Alisha felt truly seen, truly loved. Bruce treated her with a kindness and tenderness she had never known, and with each passing day, her love for him grew stronger. But as much as she wanted to believe that their love could conquer all, there was always a nagging fear in the back of her mind. What would happen when they faced the outside world? What would happen when Bruce's family found out? She didn't have to wait long to find out. One evening, Bruce invited Alisha to dinner at his parents' house. He had spoken about them often, describing them as strict but loving, traditional but fair. Alisha was nervous, but Bruce reassured her.
They're going to love you.
He said, squeezing her hand as they drove to his family's home.
How could they not?
But as they pulled up to the large stately house, Alicia's nerves returned in full force. She'd been through this before, meeting people who would judge her before they even knew her. And this time, it wasn't just strangers. These were Bruce's parents, the people who had raised him, the people whose opinions mattered most. They were greeted at the door by Bruce's mother, a tall, elegant woman with sharp features and cold blue eyes. She smiled politely at Bruce, but barely spared a glance for Alisha.
Hello, darling,
She said, kissing Bruce on the cheek.
you must be Alisha.
Her tone was distant, and her gaze, when it did finally land on Alisha, was devoid of warmth.
Yes, ma'am. It's nice to meet you.
Alisha replied, her voice steady despite the chill in the air. Bruce's father, a stern man with greying hair, appeared behind his wife, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Alisha. He said nothing, merely nodded in greeting. Dinner was uncomfortable. Bruce's parents asked polite questions, but their disapproval was palpable. They didn't outrightly say anything rude, but Alisha could feel it in the way they spoke to her, the way they avoided looking at her for too long. It was clear they didn't approve of their son's choice, but they weren't willing to say it out loud. Not yet. After dinner, Bruce's father invited him into the study to talk business, leaving Alisha alone with his mother. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, until finally, Bruce's mother spoke.
I'm sure you're a lovely girl, Alisha,
She said, her voice low and measured.
but I think you know this. Relationship is not going to work.
Alisha stiffened, her heart sinking. She had been expecting this, but hearing it said aloud still stung.
Why?
She asked quietly, meeting the older woman's gaze. Bruce's mother sighed, as if explaining something to a child.
Because people like you and people like us, we don't belong together. Our families come from different worlds. It's better for everyone if we just accept that.
Alisha felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm.
With all due respect, ma'am, I don't believe love should be bound by race or background.
Bruce's mother's expression hardened.
That's idealistic, but the world doesn't work that way. My son has a future, a reputation to uphold. Being with you, it would only complicate things.
Alicia's hands clenched into fists under the table.
I love your son, and he loves me.
She said firmly.
Love isn't always enough.
Bruce's mother replied coldly.
You'll see that in time.
When Bruce and his father returned, Alisha knew it was time to leave. The evening had been a disaster, and she could feel the tension radiating from Bruce as they drove away. He didn't say anything at first, but Alisha could see the frustration in his clenched jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel.
I'm sorry.
Alisha whispered after a long stretch of silence.
I knew this would happen.
It's not your fault.
Bruce said, his voice tight.
I didn't think they'd be like this. I thought they'd give you a chance.
In the days that followed, Bruce confronted his parents about their behavior. He argued with them, pleaded with them to accept Alisha, but their response was always the same. She's not right for you. She's not one of us. Their disapproval only fueled Bruce's determination. He loved Alisha, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even his parents, tell him who he could be with. But the pressure from his family weighed heavily on him. Alisha could see it in the way he carried himself, the way he tried to reassure her, even though the strain was taking its toll.
I don't care what they think.
Bruce said one night as they sat together on the couch in his apartment.
I'm not going to let them control my life.
But Alisha wasn't so sure. The rejection from his family had reopened old wounds she thought had healed. She'd spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong. And now, the The man she loved was being torn between her and his family.
Maybe we're being selfish.
Alisha whispered, her voice thick with emotion.
Maybe we're trying to force something that can't work.
Bruce turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief.
Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. We belong together, Alisha. I won't let them ruin this.
But deep down, Alisha couldn't shake the feeling that their love was doomed. Not because they didn't love each other enough, but because the world wouldn't let them be. The pressure mounted with each passing day. Bruce's family was relentless in their opposition, and though Bruce tried to hide it, Alisha could see the toll it was taking on him. He wasn't the same carefree, confident man she had fallen in love with. There were moments now where he seemed distracted, burdened by the weight of his family's expectations. Alisha too was struggling. The fear of losing Bruce, of losing the one person who had ever made her feel truly loved, gnawed at her. She'd fought so hard to overcome the rejection and racism she had faced throughout her life, but now it was right in front of her, threatening to take away the one thing she cared about most. One evening, as they sat together in Bruce's apartment, the tension became too much to bear.
I don't know how much longer I can do this.
Alisha said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. Bruce turned to her, alarmed.
What do you mean?
Alisha looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes.
I mean, us. Your family hates me, Bruce. They don't want us to be together and it's tearing you apart. I see it every day.
Bruce reached for her hands, squeezing them tightly.
I don't care what they think. I love you, Alisha. That's all that matters.
But is it enough?
Alisha's voice cracked and she blinked back tears.
You're fighting with your family because of me. They're your parents, Bruce. You love them, and I don't want to come between you and them.
Bruce's eyes flashed with frustration.
You're not coming between us. They're the ones who can't accept that I've found someone I love. That's their problem, not ours.
Alisha pulled her hands from his grasp, standing up and walking to the window. She stared out into the night, her heart heavy with doubt.
I don't want you to resent me one day.
She whispered.
I don't want you to wake up and realize that you gave up everything for someone who doesn't fit into your world.
Bruce stood and crossed the room to stand behind her. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, his voice soft but firm.
I'll never resent you, Alisha. You're my world, and I'll fight for you, no matter what it takes.
Alisha leaned back into him, closing her eyes as tears slid down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of rejection, of being abandoned once again, lingered like a shadow over her heart. The weeks passed, and despite Bruce's best efforts, his family's opposition only grew stronger. They stopped inviting him to family gatherings, and his mother refused to speak to him altogether. His father, once so proud of his son's achievements, now looked at him with disappointment, as if Bruce had somehow betrayed their family legacy by choosing to be with Alisha. It was more than Bruce could bear. He loved his family, but he loved Alisha more, and he couldn't stand to see her suffering because of their hatred. One evening, after another heated argument with his parents, Bruce returned to his apartment with a plan.
Let's leave,
he said abruptly, pacing the room.
Let's just get out of here, Alisha. We don't need them. We can start fresh somewhere else, where no one knows it, where we can be together without all this pressure.
Alisha looked up at him, startled.
What do you mean?
I mean, we leave tonight. We pack our things, get in the car, and just go. We'll find a place where we can build a life together, without my parents breathing down our necks.
Alicia's heart raced at the idea. It sounded so tempting, so easy, to leave behind the pain and rejection, to start over with Bruce in a place where no one would judge them for the colour of her skin. But it also sounded dangerous. What if his parents found them? What if they never stopped trying to pull Bruce away from her?
I don't know, Bruce.
She hesitated, biting her lip.
What if they come after us? What if it just makes things worse?
Bruce shook his head, determined.
I don't care. I'm done living my life according to their rules. I want to be with you, Alisha, and if that means running away, then that's what we'll do.
Alisha stared at him, her heart torn between fear and hope. She wanted to believe that running away would solve all their problems, that they could finally be free to love each other without the weight of his family's disapproval. But something in her gut told her it wouldn't be that simple. Still, the thought of being with Bruce, away from the judgmental stares and whispered comments, was too tempting to resist.
Okay.
She finally said, her voice low and uncertain.
Let's do it.
Bruce smiled, relief flooding his features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly.
We're going to be okay, Alisha. I promise.
They spent the next few hours packing their bags, planning their route, and getting ready to leave. Bruce's excitement was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, Alisha allowed herself to feel hopeful. Maybe this would work. Maybe they could find happiness after all. But deep down, a small voice whispered that things wouldn't go as smoothly as they hoped. As Bruce and Alisha drove down the highway later that night, the tension began to melt away. The wind blew through the open windows, and for the first time in weeks, they felt free. Free from the weight of disapproving eyes, free from the suffocating pressure of expectations. Alisha leaned back in her seat, a smile playing on her lips as she looked at Bruce.
I can't believe we're really doing this.
Bruce grinned, his hand resting on her thigh as he kept his eyes on the road.
Neither can I. But it feels good, doesn't it? Just the two of us, starting over.
Alisha nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. But their peace was short-lived. As they rounded a bend in the highway, flashing blue lights appeared behind them. Bruce glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowing.
That's strange.
He muttered.
I wasn't speeding or anything.
Alicia's heart skipped a beat as the police car pulled up behind them, its siren wailing.
What's going on?
I don't know.
Bruce said, pulling over to the side of the road.
Just stay calm. It's probably just a routine check.
But Alicia's gut told her something wasn't right. Her hands trembled as she watched the officers approach their car. There were 3 of them, all white, their faces grim and unreadable. Bruce rolled down the window as one of the officers reached them.
License and registration, please.
Bruce handed over his documents, his jaw tight.
Is there a problem, officer?
The officer didn't respond. Instead, he gestured for Bruce to step out of the car.
Step out, sir. We need to search your vehicle.
Alicia's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. She could feel it.
Why do you need to search the car?
Bruce asked, his voice calm but firm.
We haven't done anything wrong.
The officer's expression hardened.
Step out of the vehicle, sir. Now.
Bruce glanced at Alisha, worry flickering in his eyes. But he complied, opening the door and stepping out. Alicia's hands gripped the edge of her seat as she watched him stand by the side of the car, surrounded by the officers.
Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out as well.
Another officer said, his tone sharp. Alisha hesitated, her mind racing. Why were they doing this? What were they looking for? Reluctantly, she opened the door and stepped out. The night air was cool against her skin, but all she could feel was the rising panic in her chest. As the officers searched the car, one of them opened Alicia's bag. Her stomach dropped when she saw him pull out a small plastic bag filled with white powder.
What's this?
The officer asked, holding it up. Alicia's eyes widened in shock.
That's not mine. I've never seen that before.
Bruce stepped forward, his face pale with anger.
This is a setup. You planted that in her bag?
The officer's eyes narrowed.
Watch what you say, son. You're already in enough trouble.
Bruce's fists clenched at his sides, his body shaking with fury.
This is insane. You're framing her.
Before anyone could react, Bruce lunged toward the officer, trying to grab the bag from his hands. The other officers moved quickly, grabbing Bruce and pulling him back, but he fought them, shouting at the top of his lungs.
Let go of me. You can't do this. She didn't do anything wrong.
In the chaos, Alicia's world seemed to slow down. She watched in horror as one of the officers reached for his gun, and in an instant, everything changed. A shot rang out, echoing through the night. Bruce stumbled, his eyes wide with shock as he clutched his chest, blood spreading across his shirt like a dark, blossoming flower. Time seemed to freeze as Alicia's mind refused to process what had just happened.
No, Bruce.
She screamed, rushing towards him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. His body slumped to the ground, and his eyes, full of pain and fear, locked onto hers.
I'm sorry?
He whispered, his voice weak and strained.
I'm so sorry, Alisha.
Tears streamed down her face as she held him, her heart shattering into a million pieces.
Stay with me, Bruce. Please don't leave me. Please.
But his breaths grew shallow, his gaze distant, and then, as quickly as the bullet had taken him, Bruce was gone. Alicia's world crumbled around her as the police officers dragged her away, her hands cuffed behind her back. She barely registered their words, their cold detachment as they arrested her for possession of drugs she'd never seen before. Her mind was consumed with one thought. Bruce was gone. He was gone because of her. They had taken him from her, because of her skin, because of their hatred. because they couldn't stand to see someone like her with someone like him. The drive to the police station was a blur, her tears flowing endlessly as she replayed the moment over and over in her mind. She could still feel his blood on her hands, still hear his last words echoing in her ears. At the station, they booked her, interrogated her, and threw her into a cold grey cell. She didn't speak, didn't resist. What was the point? The world she had hoped to build with Bruce had been destroyed in an instant. Days passed, though she couldn't tell how many. The media got hold of the story. A tragic love affair between a black woman and a white man, ending in violence. But Alisha was portrayed as the villain. They painted her as a dangerous woman, a drug dealer who had led Bruce astray, a woman who had caused the death of the beloved son of a wealthy, powerful family. It wasn't until the trial, weeks later, that the truth began to unravel. Alisha sat in the courtroom, her body numb, barely aware of the proceedings around her. She didn't care what happened to her anymore. Without Bruce, what did it matter? She had lost the one person who had ever made her feel whole. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the officers who had been present the night of Bruce's death took the stand. At first, his testimony was standard, recounting the events as they had happened, sticking to the fabricated story that Alisha had been carrying drugs and that Bruce had been resisting arrest. But then, under cross-examination, his composure began to crack.
I don't know how to say this, but
The officer stammered, his eyes darting nervously around the room.
we were ordered to stop them that night. It was supposed to be a routine check, but
The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on him.
Whose orders?
Prosecutor asked, his voice sharp. The officer hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead.
Bruce's father. He paid us to stop them, to plant the drugs. He didn't want his son to leave with her. He said she was dangerous, that she was trying to ruin his family. But we didn't expect his son to be that enraged. The gun went off by mistake.
Gasps echoed through the room as the truth came out. Alicia's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. Bruce's father had orchestrated the entire thing, the setup, the framing, everything. He had been willing to destroy her life, and in the process, he had destroyed his own son. The confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Bruce's father was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, and several other charges related to the setup and Bruce's death. The police officers involved were also charged with misconduct and tampering with evidence. Alisha, now vindicated, was released from custody, but the freedom she had gained felt hollow. The man who had taken everything from her was being brought to justice, but it didn't bring Bruce back. Nothing could. Bruce's father, once a pillar of the community, was sentenced to life in prison. His downfall was public, humiliating, and complete. He had orchestrated his son's death, all because of his deep-seated racism, all because he couldn't bear to see his son with a black woman. But Alisha took no comfort in his punishment. The man she loved was gone, and the life they had dreamed of together was lost forever. Alisha left the courtroom, the bright light of the sun feeling harsh against her skin. Everything felt foreign. Life without Bruce felt unbearable. She walked through the city aimlessly, her mind a fog of grief and loss. The world had moved on, but she couldn't seem to find her way forward. In the weeks that followed, Alisha mourned Bruce deeply. The pain of his loss was a constant ache in her chest. But she knew she had to keep going, if only to honor his memory. She returned to the orphanage, the place that had shaped her, the place that had been her home when no one else wanted her. It was there that she found a sense of peace, a place to heal, to remember the love she had shared with Bruce, even if it had been cut short. Alisha poured herself into her work, helping the children who, like her, had been rejected by the world. And though she never fully recovered from Bruce's death, she found a way to carry on, knowing that his love had changed her life forever. In the end, she realized that the fight against racism wasn't over. It would continue long after her, long after Bruce. But she vowed to keep fighting, to make sure that no child, no person, ever had to feel the pain of rejection because of the color of their skin. And in her quiet moments, when the world felt too heavy to bear, she would think of Bruce, his smile, his laugh, the way he had loved her despite everything, and she would smile too, knowing that their love had been real and that it would live on in her heart forever. If you enjoyed this story, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next story.